Welcome to Faith in Jesus. Today, we delve into the inspiring story of Moses and the Red Sea from Exodus 14. Moses, born a Hebrew, was raised as an Egyptian prince in Pharaoh's palace. Despite his royal upbringing, he chose to identify with the Israelites, his people, who were enslaved in Egypt. After killing an Egyptian for beating a Hebrew, Moses fled to the desert. After Moses fled Egypt and settled in the desert, he became a shepherd. One day, while tending his flock near Mount Horeb, also known as the Mountain of God, Moses encountered a miraculous sight. He saw a bush that was on fire, but it was not consumed by the flames. Curious, Moses approached the bush to investigate this strange phenomenon. As Moses drew closer, God called to him from within the bush, saying, "Moses, Moses." Moses responded, "Here I am." God instructed him to remove his sandals, for he was standing on holy ground. God then revealed himself to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses hid his face, afraid to look at God. God told Moses that he had seen the misery of his people in Egypt and heard their cries because of their slave drivers. He had come to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, flowing with milk and honey. God then commissioned Moses to go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt. Moses, feeling inadequate for such a monumental task, questioned his own abilities. God reassured him, promising that he would be with him, and that the sign of his presence would be that after bringing the people out of Egypt, they would worship God on that very mountain. God called him to return and lead the Israelites out of slavery. Pharaoh's heart was hardened, and he refused to let the Israelites go. In response, God sent a series of 10 plagues upon Egypt. The first plague turned the Nile River into blood, causing the fish to die and the river to stink. The second plague brought a swarm of frogs that overran the land, entering houses and bedrooms. Next, the dust of Egypt became lice, tormenting people and animals alike. Swarms of flies then filled the houses and land of Egypt. A severe disease followed, striking the livestock of the Egyptians and killing their horses, donkeys, camels, cattle, sheep, and goats. Painful boils then broke out on the Egyptians and their animals. A devastating hailstorm struck next, destroying crops and livestock in the fields. This was followed by a plague of locusts, which consumed any remaining crops and greenery. Then, a thick darkness covered Egypt for 3 days, though the Israelites had light in their dwellings. The final and most devastating plague was the death of the firstborn in every Egyptian family, including Pharaoh's own son. This plague broke Pharaoh's resistance and led to the release of the Israelites. The Israelites were escaping Egypt after centuries of slavery when Pharaoh changed his mind about letting them go and pursued them with his army. Trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh's forces, the Israelites were terrified and cried out to the Lord. Moses, their leader, assured them of God's deliverance. Following God's command, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea. All night, the Lord drove the sea back with a strong east wind, turning it into dry land. The Israelites crossed the sea on dry ground, with walls of water on their right and left. The Egyptians pursued them into the sea. Once the Israelites had safely crossed, Moses again stretched out his hand over the sea, and the waters returned, covering the Egyptian army and drowning them. The Israelites saw the great power of the Lord and put their trust in him and in Moses, his servant. Moses' leadership and faith in God's command led to a miraculous deliverance, showcasing God's power and faithfulness. This story is a timeless reminder that with faith and obedience to God, even the most insurmountable obstacles can be overcome.